Did you come home from deployment and just try to go back to normal life like nothing ever happened? If so, you're not alone. A lot of us shove those memories down thinking if we ignore the past, it'll somehow stay buried. But it doesn't. It leaks out in the stress, the arguments, the disconnect from our families. And the worst part, we often don't realize it's happening until something breaks. Now imagine what could change if you gave yourself the time and space to actually process it, without shame, without judgment. And that's what this episode is about. You're going to hear a raw and honest conversation with Marine Corps veteran Ron Jansen, who learned that healing doesn't come by toughing it out alone. From combat to counseling, isolation to outdoor retreats, and even writing a memoir, Ron shares the unexpected tools that helped him reconnect with himself, with his family, and his purpose. But before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed to the email newsletter at driveonpodcast.com/subscribe. You'll get my 5 favorite episodes sent straight to your inbox. No fluff, just the best insights to help you drive on. I also want to take a moment to raise awareness for something deeply important to our community, the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Foundation. This organization is working to build a permanent national memorial in Washington, D.C. to honor the service members, families, and civilians impacted by the global war on terrorism. This memorial serves as both a tribute to those who served and a way to ensure their sacrifices are recognized and remembered for generations to come. If you want to learn more or find out how you can support the mission, visit gwatmemorialfoundation.org. Now, let's get into today's episode. Ron, welcome to the show. I'm really glad to have you here. I'm looking forward to chatting with you about your experiences and kind of your background and everything. But welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're a Marine Corps veteran, combat experience. What were some of the major challenges that you faced when you were transitioning back to the civilian world?
Sure. So one thing you didn't mention, I was a reservist as well.
Okay.
I kind of came from the civilian world, half in, half out, as a reservist is. And then especially my second deployment when I came back from Iraq, it felt like all I wanted to do was just go back to normal life. Like I was good after a year of being deployed, we were gone overall for a year. So I was really just happy to be back, but I didn't spend any time really intentionally processing any of what had happened. And so I was happy to jump into work and a bunch of other stuff, but I didn't really get to the point where I started to think about maybe the impact that those things had on me. And there's that's one end of the extreme. The other end of the extreme is like, sitting and wallowing in it and not moving on. I don't think either one of those is a great approach. I think there's an in between where you allow yourself to feel the experience or the impact of it and then move on in a more integrated way. But I think that was one of the biggest challenges because eventually it did catch up to me, but it was just much later and probably less constructively.
Yeah, that's kind of a common theme that I have noticed amongst other veterans that I've talked to, through this show and other places, that it's not always the most constructive way that we deal with things. A lot of times you see guys who, they get into drinking or, unfortunately drugs and things like that. And it's not helpful. It may help temporarily to kind of numb the pain or, whatever you want to call it, but ultimately it's not helpful, in the long run. So, you want to do things that are a lot more constructive. Like you said, feel the pain, live in that moment for a bit, but then do something with it. Don't just stay there and stuck, right? That's not where we want to be.
Mhm.
But you ended up writing a book titled An Otherwise Healthy Person. Tell us about kind of the inspiration behind that, kind of where that came from.
Sure. So it was I think about 4 years ago now that I started it. And I'm not a writer. I work in the corporate world. I've got 4 kids, so I'm busy, just have other things going. And it really was just about out of the blue. I think it was the first winter of COVID. So probably February 2021. So there wasn't a ton going on. We tried to get out of the house as much as we could, but a lot of things were shut down still. So I was probably a bit restless at home. And it just came to me one afternoon. I feel like I need to start writing. And I told my wife, and she said, well, we'll start. And so I sat down like immediately with like a blank Google Doc and a cup of coffee to just, and I found, initially I had to like limit how much time I spent writing because it was all just kind of coming out of me. And that was more of like a stream of consciousness. It wasn't structured or anything, but it was just writing about some of my experiences, especially when I was deployed to Iraq. And then I talked to a few authors, legitimate authors that were able to give me some advice on how to, kind of craft a story. And even though a memoir is, it's real events that happened, just even the creativity of thinking, like, how do you explain this process or what happened, or how do you frame it? How do you frame the scene and help the reader understand it? I really found out I enjoyed that quite a bit. So I kept going. And then the first 2/3 of my book is really my experience in when I was deployed in Iraq. And then I thought I was done with the book once I finished that part. I was pretty happy with it. And then I shared it with some friends of mine and who know me well and know my story. And they said, well, what happened after that? And I really didn't want to write about that. Because there was some, really difficult times my wife and I went through that I just personally struggled through. And I was happy to write about the combat stuff. I was less excited about that sort of thing. But I think looking back on it now, that's been the most beneficial for me. It's all been beneficial, I think, a way to process some of it. But I think that's been really helpful to put some of that in perspective and help myself understand it as much as anything.
Did you find it to be a therapeutic process going through the writing process for you?
I think so. Yeah. I didn't necessarily feel like it at the time. I mean, in some things, I started writing and thought, holy shit, I forgot all about that. It was unsettling in some ways, but in other ways, I think my experience, now that I look back at it, is you have these experiences that are really intense, a lot of them all at once, and you can't really, you don't have anything to do but just move on at the time. And I found that writing was, yeah, it was a way of putting it, making it a bit more manageable. It seemed like, even though some of those things were still very intense to read about as I did it, it was a little bit more, yeah, manageable is the best word I could think of. I'm sure there's a better one, but where to see it down on paper or on a screen, I just saw it from a different perspective than when I just had it like as a lived experience.
Right. One thing I've noticed just through like therapy that I've gone through and through talking to other people is that when you write something down, it takes longer for you to write the thing down than it does for you to
Mm.
think about that thing. So you're stuck in that moment for as long as it
Yep.
takes you to write it. And
Mhm.
typing, I don't know if typing is the same way, but it's probably similar, just as far as the length of time takes to write the thing down. And so then your brain has time to continue processing that particular moment, and then it gets to like slowly move on to the next moment that as you're writing. But you don't necessarily get that opportunity when you're just living in the moment or rethinking, thinking back to your time in Iraq, or other people and their deployments, thinking back to those times. It's just a thought, and a whole situation can be a thought that takes a second or two in your mind.
Yeah.
But when you're
Yep.
writing it, it could take you a few minutes to write that whole thing down. So your brain has a chance to actually process some of that, and it's kind of a strange thing. I've gone through that, like I said, through therapy, and I found myself writing stuff and remembering things that I was like, "Holy crap! I haven't thought about this in years." And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, it
Yep.
just like comes back to you as you're writing.
Right.
It's such a strange experience, but that's why I like to ask
Yeah.
about whether or not it was therapeutic or beneficial in that way,
Mhm.
because you never know with people if it could be beneficial, or it could be bringing back some memories that maybe you didn't necessarily want to have brought
Sure.
back, right?
Yeah, and there was a few of those too, but I think what you said about there is something to, not only do our minds work faster than than we can write or type, but I also think like our minds, like part of it is just a feeling. Like some of it's just intense, feelings that your body feels as you remember this. So it's all going on. And I think you're right. Like sitting down to actually write it out that, can be really helpful. Now, sometimes it can also in the wrong environment or the wrong setting, it might not be that helpful. I kind of laugh because ever since probably middle school, people have encouraged me to journal and write out, how I feel and things like that. And I mean, I just roll my eyes every time I've ever heard that. So I gotta, swallow my pride and say maybe there's something to it. But I found it was really helpful. And essentially what I think I was doing was just basically journaling the past now is what it felt like. And so, and I did keep a journal sporadically when I was overseas, but it was probably more of a diary. It was more
Yeah.
like, here's what we did. And I didn't do it consistently. So it didn't really, I didn't get too deep with it.
It was probably helpful to go back and thumb through that at least to bring back some memories, like where your mind was at a certain time, like what we did this, we went on that mission and we did this and whatever. So you had that at least available to you. Now, besides writing, have you found some effective ways of kind of managing any kind of challenges that you face post service, after getting out, or even when you're in the reserves, you're kind of got 1 foot in, 1 foot out almost.
Right.
That's kind of a way to think of it. But any ways that you've kind of basically managed any kind of issues that you might have been dealing with?
Yeah, I would say when I was in, I did a 6-year term, 2 deployments during that time, but I wouldn't say I probably had many, or if any, effective ways of managing back then. I was in my, mid to early 20s, and like thought I was bulletproof, and
Right.
and life's problems had not yet caught up to me. So, well, or at least I didn't have to acknowledge it yet. Probably is a better way of saying it, but. I think a couple of things that have been pretty instrumental for me is one, therapy or counseling. I was very, not interested in that for a long time either until, my wife and I in our marriage came to a real breaking point and ended up just starting through that process. And that was really helpful, not only in the relationship piece, but just to help me understand. And that was it was not an overnight process at all. That was something that, it was years, not years of intensely seeing counselors that whole time, but years of, you know, getting some perspective and then working through it. But one of the things that's also been really transformative for me is I've done some like wilderness retreats. A friend of mine who was my counselor at the time introduced me to that, in like a 4-day Christian wilderness retreat where it's 15 or 20 guys that go out and really very basic stuff, but just getting a chance to get out and in a way, I never thought about it at the time, but in a way, it's almost like a small, version of what you experience in the military. You've got a squad or a platoon or whatever, and you're going, you have a sort of mission, but you're also just hanging out and bullshitting around with and stuff like that. And those have been really, really transformative for me. I've got another one that I'm helping to lead now here in a month or so. We're going down to Kentucky for that. So I'm really that's been one of the major things, because I think there's work it's really important to do work with a counselor or a friend or somebody you trust, but also like some of the group dynamics, it's hard to replace that in any other, in other the setting. Like it's hard to find the benefits of that anywhere else.
Yeah, you definitely get that camaraderie when you have a group of guys who go out in the woods and just hanging out. And yeah, sure, there's probably a mission associated with that where you're out doing certain things, not a combat mission per se, not
Yeah.
like that, but it's you have a purpose. You're going out there for a particular goal that you're trying to achieve, and you all are there together. You all have the same motivations and everything like that, and very similar to the military where you're all there for the same purpose. You're all there
Yeah.
to
Yep.
accomplish a certain mission, and it makes it kind of easy to bond with those people, and easier anyways, I should say, to bond
Right.
with those
Yeah.
people and connect with them, right? And so I've heard from other people too that for them, just being outside in nature, in even just going for a walk in their neighborhood, just being outside is just such a incredible boost to their well-being, their mental health, their everything just gets better the more they're outside. I had one guy
Yes.
on like real early when I started this podcast years ago. He said that outdoors was like his church, his therapist, his his best friend basically. It was like all of those things all rolled
Yeah.
up into one, just being outside. And so, and then you add in that group dynamic of having those other guys with you, that probably just adds a whole extra dimension, which probably just makes things a whole lot better, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I've done some group therapy things. One was really great, run by he's written several books about it. His name is Kurt Thompson, out in Washington, D.C. area. And he runs confessional communities, which is like a group intensive counseling model. And that's great, but I don't think there's any substitute for being outdoors. I don't know what it is. I love being outside, and I think there is just something to it. It just gets a part of it, it just gets us away. Most of us, whatever we do for work, we're sitting in front of a screen or driving in a car or whatever. So just the ability to get out and be away from that, I think that's part of it. But there's just, I think, just healing properties of nature. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I can't imagine sitting in front of a screen all day long is the best for your health. That's not what we were
Right.
meant to
Right.
do. That
No.
it's
Yeah.
not how we are designed. And not only do we have computers that a lot of us are staring at all day, but we have our phones that we're carrying around with us 24/7, and that just adds to it. And you kind of need a detox from all of that, at some
Yeah.
point. So,
Mhm.
getting outside now these trips, how are they structured? Like we mentioned, there's some sort of mission or purpose or whatever that you guys are doing. Imagine it's not just going out, setting up a camp somewhere and just hanging out for a few days. There's probably more to it, right?
Sure, sure, yeah, and it's a good. I've just been studying up on it again because I'm helping to lead one here pretty soon, like I said. So really, they're structured. I don't know if you're familiar with like John Eldridge, or he wrote one of his books he wrote was called Wild at Heart, which is just he talks about just the heart of men specifically, and
Okay.
what we, you know, the way we're wired. And one of these things he taught, or the way the weekends are set up, are really to understand like we've all been wounded in life. I mean, for combat veterans, it can be something very, very intense and very specific, but also we all have things that we took from childhood, from, high school, whatever, past relationships. And I think one of the things that we really talk about is there's like the obvious wounds, like, maybe your dad leaving when you were a child,
Mm-hmm.
or an abusive parent or something like that, or, a combat experience, those things, but also just talks about the day-to-day things that for whatever reason impacts us very deeply, the trauma or whatever it is. And so a lot of that is just being able to like dig into that a little bit and share that with with other people. And that can be terrifying. I think the first time I did that, it was it was far scarier than going into combat for me. Like I would much rather face bullets all day than get in front of people and tell them, where I've been hurt in my life or whatever. But found it was really, when you do that and you realize like people are still here, they're still interested, they still care, they're not just, judging you. Or I think one of the things in the military, we're I don't know if we're trained, probably, but at least it comes naturally to us. It's just like you learn to just hide any vulnerability you have, because that's, you're, and also to point it out in anybody else, because you're training for war. You're training. You have
Yeah.
to. I think it's one of the things you have to do. When we get back, we still kind of hold on to that, or I
Right.
did at least. And I think it's natural to, because you just are used to operating that way. And so a big part of the weekend is just learning to let that, let it, maybe don't let it go entirely if you're not comfortable, but let your guard down a little bit and start to wade into some of those things.
That's interesting how you phrase that, because when you have guys, soldiers, Marines, whatever the branches that you're serving in, we have a bunch of guys that are basically training to be invincible almost. Like you're out to
Right.
go
Yeah.
destroy
Mhm.
the enemy, and that's your job, and you don't want any vulnerabilities
Right.
in that.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so I think you're right that we sort of are trained to point those things out in the other people that are around us. And I know, based on the guys that I served with, and I'm sure it's similar with a lot of other people. But if you have some sort of vulnerability, some sort of little slip up with anything, they're not going to let it go. They're going to
No, right. Yeah.
drill it in on you, and so you want to hide all of that. You don't want any of that stuff getting out, right? And so that builds
Yeah.
you up as a bigger, tougher, than you actually are, right? And so they'll pick on those things, not as necessarily like, hey, we're going to pick on you because you're weak or whatever, we don't like you,
Yeah.
because they want to make you better. They're going to pick on those
Yeah.
things
Eh,
so that you can work on whatever that vulnerability is and get rid of it, because they don't want someone with vulnerabilities hanging around them,
Yeah.
especially when bullets start flying, right? You want someone who's
Yeah.
strong and they don't have those issues that are there anymore. So it's interesting how you phrase that, and it kind of, the light bulb clicked in my head, like, why do we do that? Well, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
That's why we do it, right? But
Yeah. Yep.
to your point, when you're out now and now you're just a bunch of regular guys going out and you're hanging out together, there's really no purpose in hiding those things. Like,
Right.
they're not going to, tear you apart just because you have these vulnerabilities. They're
It-
going to maybe help you work through them, but not
Yeah.
necessarily going to tear you apart because of it, right?
Yeah. No, and it still has to be the right setting. I mean, you
Sure.
have to trust that the people there, because there are times, I mean, I think the fear is that you go into a situation like that and people do start, pushing back or whatever it is. And one of the things I've had to work on is that can be my default mode, even before I joined the Marine Corps. I mean, just growing up playing sports or whatever, things like that, it's a similar-ish
Yeah.
type attitude or environment. And so it's one of the things I can still fall into that pattern. I've had to really work on, and I'm still working on just making sure that it's like, okay, this is not a situation. Like, this is a situation we could just be real with each other. We don't need to bullshit or posture or whatever else. And yeah, I think it's really important. You don't have to, you know, find that everywhere, but I think it's been really important for me to have that in some parts of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you're right. Definitely having the right time and place for it is crucial. Now, you're talking about like a men's ministry type program. This is kind of what you're talking about as far as like these outdoor trips, or is there something else to it?
Yes, so I would say that's that primary one I'm involved in. Also, and those are through the church I attend, but then also we do something, or I'm part of something called Base Camp, and those are just storytelling events that we do once a month at a brewery, where we'll just have a guy come and share his story. So it's sort of like a testimony, it's a story of their faith and their testimony, but we're pretty intentional. Say, like, it doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to have a bow on it at the end, because I
Yeah.
think that's one of the things when people feel like they're sharing something like that, they feel like they have to say, and now that everything's perfect, where we just know, and on this earth not everything is perfect,
Right.
but we could still share real things about our faith and where we're at and how God's worked in our lives. And so yeah, we do that once a month, and that's been really great too, because it's kind of like just a 1 hour session of just somebody sharing where they're at and having a chance for other guys to hear and support that.
Yeah, and I think everybody's faith journey is going to be a series of ups and downs, and there's going to be some, that you might have a moment in your life or time period in your life where you're questioning things, questioning your faith, questioning
Yeah.
things like that. And I think that's okay. That's normal, and that's something that I think a lot of us will end up going through at one point or another, especially in light of maybe traumatic events. Like, how could that happen? How could God let that happen? That type of thing.
Yeah.
And then hearing those people's stories, and then hearing about where they you know got their strength from, or things along those lines. That might be the thing that builds somebody else up to be
Yeah.
like, you know what? Yeah,
Yep.
I can dig down and I can find that in myself as well.
Yeah, I
So
would say that's been my experience, is that until I saw other people do it or heard other people do it, I had a hard time um, understanding myself or thinking I could do it as well.
yeah, and sometimes I even talk about this with guests that are on this show, is that sometimes your story could be the thing that gets people back on the right track. That could be the start of their journey, is by hearing your story. That's the inspiration that keeps them going. I had a guy on the show a while back who he was talking about a speech that he was giving to like a group of people. And at the
Mhm.
end, there's, someone came up to him and she was talking to him and said, like, I was on the verge of like not wanting to be here anymore. I was on the verge of wanting to kill myself, and I heard your story and I said, hey, if you could go through all that stuff that you went through that you just described, I got nothing to
Yeah.
complain about. So it kind of like helped just put her back on the path that she wasn't going to end her life. So that, I mean, like, that is super powerful in and of itself. But there's countless stories out there. Everybody has a story, and it could be a faith-based story. It could not be a faith-based story. It could be anything, but that could be the thing that helps get that other person back on track. So it's
Yeah.
awesome that you have those opportunities to do that. Now, is
Mhm.
that like a local or regional type or thing that you're going to, or is there like a
Uh,
national type thing?
oh, sure. It's somewhat national. The overall organization is called Grace Explorations. I'd say many of the base camps, so there's different, kind of local ones are based in Michigan, but I think there are some outside of Michigan as well. So, somewhat regional, and I do think, me and three other guys run the one that we're a part of. It's relatively, it's the main challenge is just finding a speaker once a
Yeah.
month, and once you have that, people show up, and if you have beer, that always helps.
Yeah, that's always a good draw for some people, just to get them out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were talking before about that connection, that bond that a lot of guys miss when they get out of the military, that camaraderie. What are some ways that you found that help in kind of creating some of that connection again? Maybe not necessarily with the guys that you served with, but in your local community, and maybe it's through a church or some other groups. What are some ways that you found that makes it easy to make those types of connections?
Sure, sure. Yeah. I think one of the things that I missed and that people miss about their military experience is that it's usually a pretty intense experience, and also you have a shared mission.
Hmm.
And that could be a variety of things, but sometimes it's just the shared mission of staying alive. But when you get out, it can feel, you can feel a lot less connected to whatever mission it is. I know, I've worked in the corporate world my whole life, other than my time in the Marines, and I've had bits and pieces of that where I have felt like, hey, I'm on a team, we're working towards this goal. It feels important. So, but it hasn't always been that way, and it hasn't consistently been that way. So I think I've also looked at, like I mentioned, those retreats. That's one way I found. And then, I mean, there's some things I do, like just around like hunting or fishing trips, where it's something similar, where, it's not life or death, but you're all doing something together and working together to reach a goal. And you also have some of that time where you got downtime, or just to hang out or cook a meal or whatever it is. So yeah, I think what I found is that you can't find any one replacement for it. I haven't found a replacement for that experience, but I think you can get glimpses of it in different parts of life, and that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, and you're right. You're not going to recreate, a combat experience with guys
Yeah.
from church or in the neighborhood, or
Right.
other from work or other environments that you might be in, unless you happen to be in law enforcement or something that's high intensity like that. You might be able to
Yeah.
recreate that, but you don't want to. That's like, that's not
Right. Yeah.
something you want to strive for. That's not the goal. But you can still have that type of camaraderie where you're working towards a common goal, and you you are part of a team. You have all the components that you're missing, essentially. And one thing that when I was in the army, we were training
Mhm.
to go to Afghanistan. So this is before we even deployed. We did this training exercise. It was just driving the Humvees, getting some of the newer guys driving around, teaching them how to drive in different conditions, different terrain, and all that kind of stuff. We got stuck in the mud. We were in Louisiana. It was
Yeah.
muddy. We got stuck in the mud, and instead of backing out and going back the way we came, the powers that be decided let's charge on and keep going forward. And we
Yeah.
got even more stuck. Not only did we have one truck stuck, we had, I think we had like 4 or 5 trucks that were all stuck, and it was just like a series of errors that took place. We ended up being there. It was supposed to be like, it was right after dinner chow time, so it was only supposed to be an hour or so. So maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 o'clock at night, we were supposed to be done with it and be back to, where we were staying. Ended up not being until about lunchtime the next day that we ended up getting everything out and getting back.
Yeah.
But as much as that sounds like it sucks because it was cold, it was wet, it was
Yeah.
muddy, you're covered in whatever, we came up with some creative solutions to get these trucks out. There may or may not have been some private property that got used to just unlodge some of these trucks, but we figured it out, and it was like our whole platoon, and we like bonded so close after that experience. It was like such a crappy experience, but we bonded so well, and like it was just it was such a strange event that took place. And
Yeah.
when we got through all of it, we were closer. There's like certain things that someone said when they got frustrated, and then like we'd mimic them and we'd say it again later. Like, and this would be months later. We would still
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
saying it. Even years later, we'll say it. Even to this day, we might say some of these things that happened from that night, and we all know where it came from, and we all get a good laugh out of it, and it's just something that brought us together. I'm not saying you got to go get stuck in the woods and stuck in the mud or anything like that to have those kind of connections, but when you go out, you never know how these things will play out, and you never know what kind of connections you might make, and those
Yeah.
could turn out to be lifelong connections now. And now you have these friends for life that you can call up, you can hang out with, you can rely on them to be there for you, during those maybe more difficult times.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been my experience too, whether, in the military or not. When you go through something challenging with somebody or a group of people, you instantly become closer because after a certain point, you see the true nature of someone in situations like that. In some people that maybe you didn't. I mean, I had that with some of even the guys in my squad. Maybe I wouldn't have thought much or that they'd be much of an asset in a tough situation. And those are the people that were all stars. And some of the people I thought, man, this guy is great. He's gonna take us everywhere. They kind of, faltered in some of those situations. So I think that's part of it is you get to see, some of that forced proximity in challenging situations. You get more comfortable with who that person is,
Yeah.
their flaws and also their abilities. And yeah, it really does make you, much closer together.
And it's funny too because some of the people that like we serve together from such diverse backgrounds,
Yeah.
from each other. Some people had great family life and great upbringing and things like that. Some people were had a terrible family life, terrible upbringing, and it's just like just a mix of different people coming together.
Mm.
And you wouldn't like just on like looking at these people as individuals, you'd be like, there's no way these people are going to get along, whatever.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. You wouldn't choose the team like that.
right, but you get put
Mhm.
together, and it's all good, and
Yeah.
you wouldn't trade those people for anyone in the world. And it's pretty awesome to see how
Yeah.
that comes together. Now I know like a lot of times there's people with issues feeling like disconnected. Was that something that you were feeling like before you got involved with some of these groups? Is that kind of like a thing that you were dealing with, or was this something that you're kind of okay with?
No, well, I think I would have said I was okay with it, but I was definitely pretty disconnected. I think I was disconnected from my own heart, but also disconnected from others. Like, I had
Hmm.
friends and good friends even, but looking back at it, I would say a lot of them, they actually tried to go deeper with me and I wasn't open to it. I was
Yeah.
just very uncomfortable with it and, kind of brushed it off or pushed it off. So yeah, I would say that has really helped me to feel, yeah, it's more, I think, it's pretty, pretty common that people say, you got to find community. You got to be a part of your community and contribute and everything. And I think that's true, but that's not always clear what that means exactly. And some people are more comfortable being a little bit more, on their own, but I really don't think that's what we're made for. I mean, if you think about like the experience of COVID, like maybe it was nice to be home for a month or two if that's what you're doing. But after that, like it started having a real impact. I think we're
Yeah.
just starting to see the studies that say, okay, having people stay at home and not leave for months or years at a time is not good for anybody. That isolation. I think it's as dangerous as many diseases or other things out there.
Yeah, I mean, some people might be built for it, and that might be their thing, and
Hmm.
they're okay with that. But I would imagine that the vast majority of people need some sort of human connection, some interaction.
Yeah. Yep.
Whether they're married, they have kids, or they have friends, or people that they hang out with on a regular basis. They have to have some sort of human connection, someone that they could talk to, someone, and even if it's
Yeah.
just short, quick little conversation here and there, but just somebody in their life that they can still have those conversations with, and you know just to vent sometimes. Sometimes
Mhm.
you just need to get something off your chest and be like, man, this situation sucks, whatever it is. It just sucks, and I gotta just bitch about it for a little bit and get it off my
Yeah.
chest. But if
Yeah.
you don't have
No, I
anybody, like if all you have is like your dog or something, like, yeah, sure, you can vent to your dog, but the dog's gonna be like, all right, when's it time to eat? you know
right. Yeah. Yeah. Let's go for a walk.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that disconnection is a big issue, I think, with a lot of veterans, especially those who are struggling with PTSD and things like that. They kind of want to just shut off from the rest of the world, and like you're saying, that's probably not the best way of going about doing it. And so,
Hmm.
getting involved with groups like the one that you mentioned, but there's
Hmm.
other groups out there. Look into what your interests are. Maybe it's golfing, maybe it's fishing, maybe it's you know playing some other sport. Get on a you know men's softball league or something like that,
Or
or
something like that.
some, I don't know, whatever it is that it does it for you. Do that so that you can make a connection with some people, and again, have some of those shared experiences that we were talking about, right?
Yeah, yeah, because one of the things that I think veterans, we tend to say, well, if I'm going to do something, I want to be around people who understand me, so I want to be around other veterans. And I think there's some great things that you could do with like the American Legion or whatever,
Yeah.
but also you walk into a lot of those places, it's people drinking, in a dark room at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which, I'm saying it's not like I've never done that, but long term, I don't know if that is, necessarily the best. But there's some other things. Patrol Base Abate is an organization that I went to one of their retreats in the fall, and that was a pretty amazing experience. It's veteran run and it's for veterans, but they really push to get outside of that. We have common experiences, but there's also a lot of the world to experience. And so I've appreciated, some of those veterans organizations, but also some of the others where we have some shared experiences, but not just the same, because I think we could tend to it makes it hard if you just want to talk to other people who've had all the same experiences as you, because first of all, I mean, though there's hundreds of thousands of us, it's you know out of billions, so it's not, it's a smaller size. And I think, I think it can be challenging in a good way to get outside of, just the experiences we had, because there's a lot more to life than combat or training for war. It's part of
Right.
it, but not all of it.
Yeah, and so yeah, definitely be open to expanding your circle beyond veterans, because, to your point, I mean, out of the whole population of this country, of the world, we're a very small percentage of that, and so yeah, definitely look at people who are just basically sharing interest with you.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
and it could be any number of things that you're interested in, but look for those people, and there's
Mhm.
events, there's things all over the place if you know where to look. You know, I typically say, like, start local, like start with your
Yeah.
the
Yep.
city or town that you live in. Like, a lot of times they have events going on, or at least they're they have connections with other organizations that are in town that you can connect with, and then look out outside your town, more of a regional, like state level type thing, and start looking for other events and other activities that might be of interest to you. And then the more you do that, the more the the easier it gets as you're doing those types of activities. You start to want to do more of those types of activities because you start to feel like
Yeah.
it's enjoyable,
Yeah.
and you can start to enjoy life again, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Even I was, as you were saying that, I was thinking even something like, that following your interests, whatever they are and however weird they feel at the time. Like, I wrote in my book that was about my combat experience and a lot of just heavy but real stuff. And it was really good, but I haven't written, I've wanted to write more the last year since I finished the book and haven't written much. And I was just talking to somebody about a month ago. He also a veteran, but he's an outdoor writer. He's
Okay.
got this online outdoor journal that he's the editor for. And instantly I was like, oh, that sounds awesome. I don't just need to write about war or, or whatever. Like, I just want to write about hunting and fishing for a little bit. Like, and I don't know how much that will last, but that's actually been something for me that I was like, oh, that's something I'm interested in. I feel like, yeah, maybe I could be done writing about war for a little while, maybe forever. That would be great
Yeah.
too. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're more than just
War.
a Marine. You have
Yeah.
other dynamic aspects to who you are and your background, and like that's a good thing. We should have
Mhm.
diverse interests and diverse skills and other things that we have going on. So I think that's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, definitely
Mhm.
encourage people to look into those other things, tap into those other things that they may be into. It doesn't all have to be war and combat and all the
Yeah.
nastiness that we've been through. I mean,
Right.
you could talk about, if you're writing about the outdoors, you could talk about some extremely beautiful things, and they don't have to
Mhm.
be nasty
Yeah.
and ugly and death and destruction and all this kind of stuff. You don't have to talk about those things. You could talk about any number of things that are absolutely beautiful out in nature, and those things would be perfectly fine to write about, and that
Yeah.
probably puts your mind in a better state of mind anyways when you're writing about those good things and the rather than the bad things, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That was one of the things I was kind of thinking is like, there will always be an interest and a need to write about really intense destructive things like war and whatever, but it'll always be there.
Yeah,
You don't need to always focus on it, and there is a lot more to life than just that.
exactly.
Mhm.
Looking back
Yeah.
on your own like transition time period and the things that you went through, is there anything that you wish you had known earlier, or if you had like a little whisper in your ear or something that was like, hey, dummy, don't do that, that type of thing,
Oh,
like
yeah.
would anything that you wish you would have known that you can maybe share with other people who might be on a similar path?
Sure. Yeah. I think I mentioned it kind of at the start, but I think I wish I would have been more curious about like what was going on inside of me. And that
Mm-hmm.
sounds pretty wishy-washy, I know, but no, just really like what is the impact of this, this really intense experience, this that you're coming out of, like even on, it wasn't even close to all bad. Like there was some
Mm-hmm.
really good stuff. There was a lot of growth, a lot of learning, leadership lessons, that sort of thing. But I didn't take time to really process any of it or even think about it. I just in I did the opposite. I was like, that is past. It wasn't bad. It was just it doesn't really apply to my current life, so I'm
Mm-hmm.
moving on. And part of that I think was unconsciously trying to not have to deal with the intensity of it. And so I wish I would have. I'm not sure honestly what it would have looked like, but maybe I should have taken some time to do that or let myself, even if it felt like it was getting too much, like, talk to somebody about it or find somebody who was 10 years ahead of me and gone through the similar thing
Yeah.
and find out from them because yeah, I eventually got there, but I think I wasted a lot of time and energy and hurt some people in the process just by running from that. And I, for whatever reason, I didn't distract myself with more destructive things like, drugs or whatever, but I distracted myself with things that still weren't healthy, even if they were, they were more like achievement at work and making myself, making everybody think I had everything figured out and I didn't.
Right,
Um,
and those types of things could be toxic in and of themselves. I mean, not to say that
yeah,
like there's anything wrong about being successful, right? But
sure, yeah,
if it's
mhm,
at the expense of the other people who are important to you, family
yeah,
and people like that, then there's a balance that you need to kind of deal with there. And they talk about work life balance. I don't know how real that
mhm,
is. Like
right, yeah,
there's whatever. That's a whole other topic that we can get into. But
mhm,
if you're being extremely successful, rising to the top of the corporate ladder, and you're being 100% successful over there, what is it on the other side that you're neglecting,
sure.
that you're not
Yeah,
doing
yep.
well with?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and I've found I think I can be in a healthy place and still like achieve things and do well at work and put a lot into it, but also I've got to be, really focused on why am I doing this? Is this because I need everybody to approve of me, or is
mhm.
it because I want to do a good job and use my skills the best I can?
Yeah,
So, and then just maybe to answer your question too, the second piece is I wish I would have found that community or went after it. And I know that can be hard because it's sometimes you get to that point and it doesn't work out for whatever reason. It's not the right group. It's not the right, team, whatever. I wish I would have, went at or tried to find it and kept trying to find it. Like I said, I took 10 or 15 years before I really even started digging into it.
yeah, and
Yeah.
we do that to
Do
ourselves.
that to ourselves. Mhm.
We
Yeah. Yeah.
we know that there's something out there that can help us, but we do the, oh, I'll be fine, I don't need that, I'll,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
kind of lie to ourselves, or whatever it is that we say to ourselves. But at the end of the day, we probably do need some of this, and it's
Yeah.
okay to go get help if that's what you need, if or go find a group of people that you can hang out with, and you know build that trust and camaraderie with again, and all those things that you've missed from your time in the military. You can find those things in other places as well. So if you're that type of person where you're feeling like, maybe I should, well, just go do it. And
Yeah.
what's the worst that's going to happen is you get there and you're like,
Mhm.
I don't click with those people. Okay, well, you tried.
Yeah.
Move on.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
It's
Yeah. It's not maybe not an indication you should stop.
right, exactly. Move on to the next thing, I guess, is what
Yeah.
I
Yep.
should say. Just
Yeah.
you tried
Yep.
one thing, didn't work, no big deal, and move on. So
Mhm.
yeah, no, that's awesome advice. I think that's really, I think what we want to get out to the listeners here is that message of just keep trying, and
Mhm.
the sooner the better too, because a lot of times these problems don't get better on their own just by sitting there and dealing with them on or quote unquote dealing with them on your own,
Right.
because let's face it, we're not the best at dealing with these things on our own.
No. Right. Yeah. None of us learned it from a young age. Or I guess I didn't. I don't know
No,
if
I mean,
others.
and I don't think I did really either, but the military certainly doesn't issue the guidebook for how to deal with
Right.
these things. But that's why we have people out there who can help you with these things. And I've said this before on this show, but I think it's a good point that there's a lot of things in life that we rely on other people for.
Yeah.
I don't know
Mhm.
how to fix my car's engine if something happened with it. So I go to a mechanic. Nobody's going to look at me like I'm nuts for going to a mechanic.
Right.
You know, it's like I have other skills and other interests that
Mhm.
take up more of my time. If I could, I'm not saying I couldn't learn how to do it, just I don't have time to. And so I'm going to bring it
Yeah.
to a
Yeah.
mechanic, and the mechanic's going to do it. And getting your hair cut, or getting other things like that. It's like I go to get my haircuts from someplace because I don't want to end up looking like a clown. I don't know. Like
You're right. You
so
go to the ex.
yeah, you go to the experts, and so why should your mental health be any different, or physical health, or anything? Why
Yeah.
should those things be any different? And yeah, sure, people might say, "Oh, I've been to a psychiatrist, I've been to a doctor, I've been to this, that, and that," and they all suck, and they're terrible. Well, really, do all of them suck, or
Yeah.
just the ones that you've been to? And how many
Yeah.
have you
Yeah.
really been to at the end of the day,
Yep.
right? So again, keep trying. Just because one
Yeah.
sucks doesn't mean
Yep.
that they all suck, right?
Yeah, yeah, that I would absolutely say second that. I mean, and I my experience because I started with the VA is that I think the VA has some great people working there, and they've got some dipshits working there, and it's hard to tell which one is which. So I mean, you could definitely find good resources there, but you might have to go, private. And I would say the same thing in private, the private practice world. There's some great people and some idiots, and unfortunately, you just got to go. You got to keep at it because it's easy. Like you said, it's easy to have one bad experience and just back away entirely. But you just got to find what you need. That
I mean, just look at your everyday encounters with people at the grocery store, at other places that you might be at, Home Depot or wherever you might be going out to, and I'm not talking about employees. I'm not knocking the people who work at these places at all. I'm talking about just your everyday person who's also in the store. You see some stupid shit going on, so
it's all around us, and
it's
sometimes
all
it's
around
me
us.
doing it. So I can't hold them accountable all the
Exactly.
time.
But there's some things that are happening in people's heads, and you may just happen to get one of those types of people when you're going out. So just keep that in mind, that not everybody's perfect, and you might take a little work to find the right one for you. So anyways, Ron, before we wrap up, I want to give you a chance to let listeners know where they can learn more about you, your work, your book, and things like that, where they can connect with you and get a copy of the book and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. So I don't have a super strong social media presence, but I am on Instagram and then also Facebook. And then LinkedIn is probably where I'm most prevalent. Like I said, I work the corporate world, so I put some stuff out there as well. So, and then my book does have a website. It's available on Amazon, but it's called An Otherwise Healthy Person. And yeah, it's an otherwisehealthyperson.com is the book title. So, or I'm sorry, the website link. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll put the links to all of that in the show notes for the listeners. So definitely go check out the book and get a copy for the listeners here. But Ron, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show, sharing your story, sharing your experiences. Really do appreciate your insights, and especially, connecting with other people and making those connections, I think is super important. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Glad I could come on.